Everyone, welcome. I am happy to be with you all tonight, as long with our authors Ryan Habermeyer and Tim Conrad. Unfortunately, Brett Biebel was unable to make it tonight, but he will come back. So we will start with each of our authors, and then we will go into a little Q&A, and then there will be a book sale. So yeah, we will start with that. And then I would like to invite Dr. Ross Tankadal, our director and publisher, to say a few words.
Well, thanks. Good evening. My name is Ross K. Tangadal, Director and Publisher of Cornerstone Press at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the launch of two of our newest fiction titles, The Machine We Trust by Tim Conrad and Salt Folk by Ryan Habermeyer. Brett Biebel, as Ellie told us, was scheduled to join us tonight as well, but he was unable to make it, and we'll host him and celebrate the release of his new book, Gridlock, later this month. But his book will still be for sale this evening if you would like to come on over and have a look at it. Tonight you'll have the chance to listen to the authors read from their new books, as well as discuss their writing strategies and the stories that they've written with our editorial director, Ellie Atkinson. But before we get to that, I would like to thank a number of people for their support of the press in various ways. Executive editors Jeff Snowbarger and Frisia McKee, and senior editors Brett Hill and Grace Stahl. Ingram Lightning Source, our distributor. Chancellor Thomas Gibson, Provost Levon Cornell Swanson, and Vice Chancellor Pratima Gandhi of Financial Operations. Dean Joshua Hagan, Carrie Hutton, and Carrie Zielkowski of the College of Letters and Science. Assistant Dean Tobias Barsky of the School of Humanities and Global Studies. Chair Rebecca Stevens of the Department of English, as well as the entire faculty and staff of the department. Lindsay Cheever and Samantha Petch of the School of Humanities and Global Studies. Ihor Bartoszewski and Michael Martin of the university's IT department. Carrie Hebler, Brittany Kaminsky, and Mies Vang of University Communications and Marketing. Robin Spindler, Kathy Stettel, and their staff at the Point Print and Design Studio, who print all of our books here on campus. Sue Fisher and Eva Hathaway of UWSP Facility Services and Central Stores, who handle all of our mailing. Katie Horn of the UWSP Store and Text Rental, the Bookshop Co-op of Stevens Point, and Bound to Happen Bookstore of Stevens Point. We cannot do what we do without all of them in some fashion, so we thank them. Our press, of course, would not be possible without the energetic participation from our diverse student staff, comprised mostly of English majors and minors at the university. Thank you to all of my student staff for doing the hard work of publishing with professionalism and excitement. I would especially like to thank our current executive staff, editorial director Ellie Atkinson, managing editors Ava Nielsen and Chloe Shazinski, production director Carolyn Serwinski, production manager Allison Lang, production editors Maddie Ruana and Forrest Campbell, media director Ava Willett, media manager Zoe Deinart, sales director Natalie Ryder, and sales manager Sophie McPherson. Finally, I wish to thank Tim and Ryan for entrusting us with their excellent work. Tonight is ultimately a celebration of their writing. Congratulations on the publications of your books and your entrance into the Cornerstone Press family. So now I would like to turn it over to Ellie, who will guide us through the remainder of the event. Thank you all for coming and for supporting the Cornerstone Press here at the university. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tangadal. We will start with the readings, and first up is Tim Conrad. And a little book synopsis is: a boy attends summer camp where campers are tasked with managing their own flocks of sheep. A set of brothers kidnap their father's prized pet buffalo. A young man travels the country with his mother, a peripatetic professor who has pioneered radical service learning curriculum. An unemployed man attempts to teach himself to be a polygraph test. In The Machine We Trust, Tim Conrad's narrators and characters come of age in surreal American landscape, sometimes late, sometimes unsuccessfully. With the exacting prose that searches and clutches, Conrad exposes the cracks where hearts are broken and redemption is just one chance away. Tim Conrad holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and a PhD from Western Michigan University. His work has been published in journals such as Story, Willow Springs, Hayden's Ferry Review, and Quarterly West. He teaches creative writing at Michigan State University. Please welcome Tim Conrad.
Perfect. Thank you, Ellie, and thank you, Ross, and thank you to all the students who had a hand in working on this. I know over the fall especially, I saw so many names come through that document, and that meant a lot of you were paying attention to my work, and I greatly appreciate that. I'm going to read from the start of a story tonight, so I shouldn't need to contextualize too much. I will read from what I think was one of the stories you all liked. So we'll go with that. And maybe you won't like it tonight, but that's okay. You don't have to tell me. The story's called Knuckles. When I was 15, my brothers and I stole our father's pet buffalo. But before I get too far into that, I need to start with the case against my father. 1. My father loved Knuckles, that was the buffalo's name, more than his children. I have 4 brothers, but in spite of our number, we filled the landscape around the buffalo like cheap sideshows. My father's primary energies were devoted to its care. He even built an addition onto the house. Knuckles was housebroken at an early age, and the picture that adorned his desk was not of him and his sons on a fishing trip, or at a baseball game, or even of him and our mother. Rather, it was of Knuckles, seated at the kitchen table on his 3rd birthday, his bowl of dry cereal spilled out before him, a party hat on his head. 2. My father was fond of botched idioms such as when the tough get going, wear it, and if the shoe fits, make hay. His favorite, people in glass houses shouldn't throw shit at fans. He often quoted these in the presence of company. 3. My father was incapable of small talk without giving unsolicited advice. 4. My father turned our small ranch into a tourist attraction. 5. As stock and western shows, he often waxed his mustache and wore a t-shirt that read, "My dance partner is hairier than I am." 6. 3 weeks before we took the buffalo, my father skipped the twins' final high school football game to tend to Knuckles, who was sick with flu-like symptoms, although the veterinarian assured him it was probably a simple case of dietary indiscretion. It wouldn't be that noteworthy, except it was the playoffs, and we lived in Texas. The night of the game, I remember hoping our father would show up. My mother was there, but as you're probably beginning to see, this isn't really about her. I'm the youngest of the brothers, preceded in order by a set of twins, Adam and Aaron, 2 middle children, Ben and Chris. We all have ordinary names and in our own unique ways have probably spent years trying to overcome them. At the time of the game, I was a freshman, but due to my size, I was starting on the offensive line. Back then, I weighed in at just shy of 300 pounds if I'd eaten a light lunch, and my girth was useful, even if I struggled to wrangle opposing speed rushers. I posed an obstacle. My brothers filled more glamorous positions, fullback, tight end, linebacker. We weren't outstanding, but we played with abandon, and on most evenings we were worth watching. I won't bore you with the details of the game, although I remember most of them. We ended up losing by a 4th quarter field goal, but it was our father I meant to tell you about. Throughout the game, I kept looking into the home stands, hopefully he might materialize, but when Central's quarterback took the final knee, he was nowhere to be seen. He had missed all but 2 games that year, mostly for Knuckles-related reasons. On senior night, he came but brought the buffalo and stood off at the far end of the track grazing him. The children flocked from both sides, and the state troopers helped corral traffic like Christmas elves. After the game, I patted the twins on the shoulder pads as we headed off. They kept glancing toward the stands. I looked down to where our silhouettes made slanted X's on the track in front of us. Adam, number 53, looked back at me and said, "Motherfucker," nothing else. As I tried to trace the idea of kidnapping Knuckles back to its genesis, the football game is where I end up, but I know it had long been building. In my history class, I was learning about the French Revolution, about how 18th century France was ripe for bloodlust. And in natural sciences, I was learning geysers are created when a bottom layer of subterranean water is superheated and constricted until it pushes to the surface and explodes in a cloud of steam. I was barely pulling C's in both classes, but that doesn't mean I wasn't learning anything. Why everyone loved Knuckles? 1, he danced. My father had taught him somewhere early on, although he refused to admit it. He said Knuckles naturally loved it and pointed out how he pouted when my father didn't oblige. We often came home to them dancing as we did after the playoff game. His hooves were up on my father's shoulders and there was music playing. All our father said was, "Look who's feeling better." I can't turn the pages of my own book. 2, he made you feel guilty. I'll admit he was cute in his strange buffalo way, but the power was in his eyes that contained volumes of history. When I was young, I learned about the great slaughters on the plains and about how you could follow the railroads, hopping from one carcass to another without ever touching the ground. Knuckles was a living memorial. 3, we lived in Texas, a land of mythical scale and appetite. Its people do not fear superlatives. My father hung a wooden sign above Knuckles' door proclaiming, "Home of the largest pet in North America," and people came to see. They toured his room and fell in love with the idea he was part of the family. They laughed at my father's description of how Knuckles sometimes stayed in his room all day and only came out, quote, to potty. Then they laughed again as he added, just like my other teenagers. 4, he was photogenic. In addition to the picture on my father's desk, when the tourists came, we would dress Knuckles up in various tailored costumes. You could get your picture taken as his bride, or as his native hunter, or even, for a limited time, as his little brother. 5, he was a celebrity, and after a certain point, that alone is enough to win over a good many people. There was even talk of a television special at one point, but it was to be done by a low-budget network that got bought out. As with most crimes, the abduction of Knuckles was a crime of opportunity. Shortly after football season, my father made the decision to expand Knuckles' enclosure. The old fencing was battered and needed to be replaced. Knuckles tended to be hard on it, especially during mating season. But since he couldn't bear to sequester the buffalo entirely within his room, he planned it to coincide with a small country and western exposition in Amarillo. It was a small affair, one that he'd been to several years running and thought we could handle. Give them the typical spiel, but don't demonstrate the dancing, he said. We need them to come out here to see more. Here's the scene where my brothers and I conspire around a bonfire. We'd been making s'mores and complaining about Knuckles, as we were prone to do. What I don't get, Aaron said, is how he's not making more profit off that stupid thing. He spends everything he brings in on the buffalo. Why can't he expand the house for us? The twins were still sharing a room, even though they were seniors. Motherfucker, Adam said. It's not like we're getting anything from him, Chris said. We cataloged the injustices. Ben was still bitter that we couldn't ski behind him, as we'd done for one glorious day the summer before when we found water skis at a local yard sale and made Knuckles pull us around the pasture. Our father had declared that due to our size, it exhausted him. Chris complained that our mother always allied herself with our father, with Knuckles. I don't get it, he said. Why did they have us if he was always going to be their favorite? Everyone looked at me as though I had something to add. I couldn't help but feel a little flattered. Even though I played football with them, it had only been recently that they'd included me in their bonfires, their weekly retreat from all things buffalo. I thought about how a buffalo in captivity was likely to live only about 25 years. Instead, I said, I hate him. Me too, they echoed. Motherfucker, Adam said again, as though this decided something. I'll skip a bit. I'll read one other section. All you need to know is they go about trying to sell the buffalo, and it doesn't really go as smoothly as they expect. They go to a tourist trap, interstate. It's an interstate rest area that has a Texas flag so big they can't really fly it at half mast because it will touch the ground. And they get kicked out, and so they have to set up shop down the way in sort of an abandoned lot. The truth was that none of us quite understood how to go about what we were doing. We were open to suggestions. The tourist trap helped. They kicked us out as soon as we parked outside the lines and up against the curb, and we were forced instead to set up shop one exit down in an abandoned lot next to a gas station. There were no trees, just high grass and a perimeter of brightly colored campaign signs. Guy for sheriff, one read. Ben insisted on keeping that one standing, but we took the rest down and fashioned a couple of our own that read, yes, the buffalo is for sale. We parked the trailer in the middle of the lot and stood by its side like bowling pins. We waited, but no one stopped. Do you suppose Knuckles needs a walk? I finally asked, but no one moved. I opened the back of the trailer and grabbed Knuckles' lead. He was surprisingly agile. Buffalo in general appear much clumsier than they actually are, but even so, I hadn't expected him to be capable of such power and grace so soon after confinement. We took a couple laps around the lot before stopping for a bathroom and snack break near the gas station dumpsters. At the pumps, a few people stared and took pictures, but most were nonplussed. He ate for several minutes, creating a clearing in the grass. I remembered from school what our teacher had said about buffaloes being nomadic, about their need for constant movement. After he finished, I picked some stray chaff out of his beard, and we took a few more laps before Knuckles pulled me back toward his captors, who were busy playing poker like a set of rodeo clowns. Reasons for not running away from home. 1, we all loved football. 2, we believed we needed each other, and our collective mass created something we didn't think we could move. 3, in spite of the hoopla surrounding the buffalo, the wooden gate at the end of our lane still read Lewis & Sons and loomed as a distant promise. 4, the presence of injustice and oppression. 5, our adolescent fascination with such themes and our eagerness to define ourselves against them. We waited through the midday heat without much success. We were growing sweaty and bored, and my brothers tried to strike up the old conversation about how much we hated the buffalo, but it fizzled after a couple minutes. One man finally did stop by. He wore a cowboy hat with the word stud stenciled across the front. He was young and curious that the sign was for real. When we confirmed it, he laughed, said right on, and moved next door to pump some gas. For lunch, we sent Chris to buy a pile of snack food from the convenience store. He came back with 3 bags of potato chips, a few boxes of Little Debbie's, and a case of Dr. Pepper. We sat and ate in silence. The soda was warm and unsatisfying and kept watching for our father, but decided after a while that scrutinizing traffic is the sort of activity that can make a person go insane. A couple of sheriff deputies passed by, but they didn't seem to consider us any kind of nuisance. Toward evening, a serious buyer did arrive. Rather than pulling through the driveway, he hopped the curb in his pickup. It felt like an announcement of intentions. We all stood up and flapped our shirts in unison. Knuckles continued lounging on his stomach. From here, I've collected other happy or more endings. One, our father, through intuition and love for his buffalo, which acts as a homing device in such moments, arrives at the lot to a charging Knuckles. We and the buyer are in his path, and our father is forced to shoot his beloved buffalo to save his other sons. Two, the buyer is native, and we sell the buffalo to him with the confidence that somehow what we've done has been redeemed, that we are noble and in harmony with the universe. Three, bored, we tell the buyer that the sign's a joke. He laughs like the stud did, and we all return home. If you like any of these, you can stop here, although none of them happened. Our father did eventually arrive, but I might not get to that part. Instead, I give you the scene with the buyer. The man dismounted his pickup and looked our way. From a distance, he called out howdy, but kept his eyes trained on Knuckles as he walked closer. When he reached us, he shook each of our hands without giving a name, as though we'd already reached an agreement. That's a pretty docile buffalo you have there, he said. It is, Aaron said, domesticated even. The man grunted. He rolled his lips around in a way that suggested he was accustomed to chewing and spitting things. For a moment, none of us said anything. Everyone stared at Knuckles and watched him swish his tail in the heat. Then, as if sensing his cue, he rolled onto his back, threw his legs in the air, and ground his shoulders into the dirt. A cloud of dust blew our way, and we all turned away and covered our faces. Everyone, that is, except the man who kept watching. After a minute or so, Knuckles settled back onto his belly, somehow satisfied. How much for the hair? The man asked. My brothers and I looked at each other. Say again? The hair, the pelage. He stepped forward and gently ran his hand through Knuckles' coat. Up close, the man smelled like tobacco and corned beef. Somewhere I'd learned that dogs are capable of at least 100 expressions, and although I was conflicted about Knuckles, I believed he was intelligent, capable of at least 20. I looked to him for clairvoyance. Before I could say anything, Chris asked, "Why don't you want the whole buffalo?" It lingered as an accusation until Aaron said, $500. The man laughed. It sounded nothing like the stud. I'll give you $10 a pound. Okay, Adam said, what do we need to do? We followed the man to a nearby ranch. We weren't scared at this point and had no reason to be. We were pretty big, and in spite of the man's cryptic intentions, we were finally accomplishing something that resembled our original intention. Motherfucker, Adam yelled out the window to passing traffic. Aaron drummed on the dashboard and revved the truck at stop signs. Ben and Chris grinned like idiots. At his ranch, he had us lead Knuckles into a loading chute that dead-ended into the side of a pole barn. Knuckles was so used to being handled that he didn't object. The rancher tied Knuckles' muzzle to the bar above his head and tethered his legs to the side. He asked, "Ever shaved him before?" We said we hadn't. It's November, so the pelage is as thick as it's going to get. After we do this, you'll probably need to slaughter him or keep him in a barn for the rest of the winter. A couple of my brothers laughed. Can we help? Adam asked, and the rancher was glad to let us. Reasons you should never shave a buffalo. One, there's a lot more hair than you probably realize. It's messy and time-consuming, even with several helpers. There's over a foot of hair on a buffalo's head and over 8 inches on the breast, the rancher measured. The tail has almost 20 inches. Two, only a professional should do such things, one accustomed to the buffalo's fidgeting and discomfort. Three, it's not natural. Four, in shaving, you may see a side of your coworkers that frightens you. My brothers worked with sloppy glee, cutting large chunks from the flanks and hindquarters. As it fell onto the tarp below, they laughed and worked faster, and they shaved the beard and head, even though the man said the hair was too coarse for his purposes. Five, a buffalo's coat is its glory. Without it, a buffalo looks pathetically bovine and dispossessed. When finished, its bare hump will look like a burden, and its inability to raise its head above its shoulders will suddenly break your heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. One of our managing editors, Ava Nielsen, and I were the lead editors on the Machine Me. It's one of those stories that after you read it, it still moves you no matter how many times you read it. And it's just great. So thank you for reading that one. And our next reader has more fantastic stories, of course. I was not the lead editor for his book, but the one that was, Brett Hill, is here, so that's also good. So Ryan Habermeyer's book is set within a speculative geography that is not Utah's past, present, and future. The panoramic collage of stories of flash fiction and salt folk explore the eco-fabulist and avarice of the American West at the intersections of history and myth. The Yeti, recently deported from the Himalayas, finds himself in a Mormon retirement community. A glacier grows in the toxic valley left behind by the evaporated Great Salt Lake. A librarian collects the residue of a decayed rainbow on the outskirts of Salt Lake City. Melancholically absurd, the salty women and foolhardily men in Ryan Habermeyer's reimagined American West confront catastrophes large and small, magical and mundane, with grotesque optimism and quixotic tenderness. Ryan Habermeyer is the author of the short story collection, The Science of the Lost Futures, published in 2018. His prize-winning stories and essays have appeared in Conjunctions, Alaska Quarterly Review, Copper Nickel, Massachusetts Review, and elsewhere. He is an associate professor of creative writing and literature in Salisbury University. Please welcome Ryan Habermeyer.
First of all, I've got to say that having spent some time in Texas, that Tim's story is 100% accurate and very legit for a Texas story, so I appreciated that and enjoyed that very much. And to echo what Tim said as well, thank you to all of you. Thank you to Ross for bringing the book to life, and to thank you for all the students and everyone who edited and assisted in that process. I'm incredibly grateful and appreciative of that. So I'm going to read the first story in the collection here, which is called La Petite Morte. And I was giving Ross a little bit of the background of this story today in class, or not in class, sorry, I can't remember where I am. At lunch, when we were at lunch today. So my last semester in my PhD program, I was fairly convinced that I was never going to find an academic job, simply because the odds of it are so difficult these days. And I signed up for some kind of, I don't know what it was. It was like, here are alternative things you can do if you have a PhD in the humanities. And this story is very true, by the way. I exaggerate a lot of things, but this story is 100% true. I got an email a couple days later that said, and this was the heading of the email, it said, "Electro-ejaculators wanted in Africa." And as one does when you get an email like that, you say, well, yes, I'm going to open that email. So I opened the email, and it was all about conservation groups in Africa, the process they went by to capture male elephants, sedate them, and then they used like this crazy, they had pictures of it, this crazy apparatus that looked like something from an Elon Musk nightmare, you know, like that they hook into the elephant, then they extract semen, and they use that to then go and boost the elephant population. So I tried multiple times to write that story. I wrote it as an essay once, and it just didn't work. And then eventually I finally got around to making it work as a story. And I thought, you know, why not put it as the first story in the collection, so at least you know what you're getting into when you open up this book. It kind of has, I think at one point I wrote it as a poem even, which is why it has this sort of lyrical tone and style to it as well. So that's just a little bit of a preface for it. So like I said, it's titled La Petite Morte. Every morning, the elephant masturbator lures the elephant into the cage by humming Bach. The elephant, blind and tuskless, lumbers slowly onto the hay, kneeling like a prince, obviously in love with the low, languid melody. The elephant masturbator continues humming as she administers the sedative, stares into the elephant's wet, glossy eyes as it slips into wherever it is that elephants go when they dream. She rubs his trunk and counts 3, 2, 1. As the elephant masturbator gently arouses the elephant, she traces the wrinkles on its skin. Here is a scar from fleeing the poachers. Here is a reddish patch that may or may not be an infection. And here are the freckles that she's named Larry, Curly, and Mo. By the time the elephant awakens, the elephant masturbator has scavenged a meal of twigs, roots, leaves, and the last 2 yellow flower petals in this part of the world. Watching the elephant eat, the elephant masturbator tells the elephant about Hanno, the elephant of Pope Leo X, and Surus, who crossed the Alps with Hannibal, and a nameless pachyderm knighted by Henry III, who died drinking too much red wine while consoling the grief-stricken king. Once home, the elephant masturbator pours herself a glass of sour wine and sits on her balcony, staring at the haze of neon lights and listening to sirens echo, wondering why she stays in this desert, in this city like the edge of a map torn off that nobody bothered to tape back together. She listens to Bach, she prefers the fugues in D minor, and she drinks more wine. At dawn, the elephant masturbator arouses the elephant, after which they go for a walk. At dusk, the elephant masturbator arouses the elephant, after which they go for a walk. At the restaurant, the elephant masturbator eats mealworms sautéed in a kind of yellow pesto with a side of fried crickets. The man sitting across from her talks about trying to save the last butterflies from extinction. He rubs his thumb on the white tablecloth until it leaves a greasy stain. The emaciated waitress fills their cups with brownish water. "It's important work we're doing," he says. "You have a cricket leg in your teeth," she says. After her date, the elephant masturbator visits the elephant and pushes fruit rinds buzzing with flies through the cage bars. She rubs his trunk and tells him about the man with the comb-over. The elephant leans against the cage and sighs as if he wants to be touched too. Mwisho, she calls him, which in Swahili means the end. The elephant masturbator sponges water over Mwisho's ears, legs, and stomach. She's careful around his eyes. She knows how this will end. Alone, floating towards her petite mort, she imagines the shriveled elephant carcass carried away by devoted ants until there's just a keyboard of bones in the dust. It would be nice, she thinks, if she was also a sacrament. Most of the time when the elephant climaxes, there's just a noise. Poof, like air let out of a tire. On a good day, the elephant masturbator collects the sperm in a plastic container. It looks cloudy, like a root beer float. The elephant masturbator bottles and seals the container. She scribbles the descriptions on the label. Sometimes she includes a note that says, "We're still here." She ships them to the post office, to the scientist she's not even sure exists, and then sits on her porch steps and waits for the mail that never comes. The elephant masturbator closes her eyes on the bed and thinks of Mwisho from the inside out, organs to skeleton to skin, and feels oddly happy at the inexplicableness of it all. Leaving the restaurant, the comb-over man takes her hand as they walk through what was once the Great Salt Lake, now dried up like a bowl licked clean by a greedy toddler. Kids with red scaly patches around their eyes scare away gulls from the debris. The arsenic haze steams yellow. The elephant masturbator's eyes sting and her nostrils burn. She wonders what people used to do for foreplay. The elephant masturbator powders Mwisho with dust. She shoos away flies, steals pillows from the abandoned hotels and spreads them on the cage floor. She removes lice, pedicures debris between his toes, brushes his teeth, and then it's time to start over and powder him with dust again. The elephant masturbator keeps coins in her pocket. As they walk, the coins make a metallic swish. The elephant likes to filch the coins with his trunk. Sometimes the elephant masturbator will do a trick her mother taught her and make a coin disappear and then reappear behind the elephant's floppy ear. The elephant smiles, but does not laugh. The elephant masturbator sponges the elephant and rubs away dead skin, counting the moles on the elephant's flank, Larry, Curly, and Mo. She's been trying to get the elephant to laugh. The chimps are gone, the foxes, the dolphins, the cows, all gone. All the laughing things are now extinct. Even the butterflies, which never laughed, are almost gone, says the comb-over man at the restaurant trying to save them. She pulls faces for the elephant and falls off the stool, trying to get him to mimic her. Nyuk, nyuk, nyuk. The elephant masturbator saves a butterfly caught in a spider's web on the windowsill. Its wing is broken. She squishes it between her fingers, its juices sticking her skin for days. They walk and they walk and they walk. Out of nowhere, the desert opens into a canyon. The elephant masturbator leans over the edge. Who knows how long it has been there, this earthy mouth like the scar of some geological castration. The elephant masturbator doesn't tell Mwisho her name. She doesn't tell Mwisho about her scars. She doesn't tell him about the things that make her laugh. She doesn't tell him how in the old war the Germans dropped elephants out of planes when they ran out of bombs. She doesn't tell Mwisho how her father died in Afghanistan and she started sleeping on the stairs, anxious to twist herself into something else, always disappointed that she is still flesh and bone. And Mwisho scuffs his foot in the dirt. The elephant masturbator stomps her foot in response, knowing Mwisho will not call her unlucky or needy or unlovable. There are so many kinds of laughter, the elephant masturbator tells Mwisho as she traces a finger over Larry, Curly, and Mo. Funny laugh, mean laugh, sad laugh, nervous laugh, sick laugh, laughing to keep from crying, laughing to forget, dying laughter, laughing to remember. Which kind of laughter do you want to be? The elephant masturbator's hands do not shake as she steadies the syringe and empties the sedative into the elephant, but they always tremble when she reaches for the glass of wine at the restaurant. It's just nerves, she smiles. I promise not to bite, the man says. She stares out the window at the desert. Hidden beneath the dust, she imagines the skeletons of creeping things fossilized in radioactive prayer. Sometimes the sedative frightens the elephant. It gives him bad dreams. He twitches until the cage feels like it might collapse. He must be coaxed into romance. At first, she had to reach her arm up his rectum, elbow deep, and finger a golf ball-sized gland until the long gray shaft emerged. But now she knows Mwisho prefers that she rubs his foot. Elephants speak through their feet, talking and listening through vibrations. So she rubs his foot that doubles as a tongue and an ear, surprised to discover that Mwisho has no real interest in sex. He wants a lover. He wants words. But still, it's a precarious moment. She's been careless before. One wrong touch and the jumbo organ whips back and forth like an errant fire hose, slapping her right below the eye. Sperm bubbles in the dirt. Fool, she tells herself, her ears still ringing hours later. She waits for the wound to bleed, but it never does. At night, she looks in the mirror as the skin welts and swells and the bruise goes from purple to yellow to gray. She tries to collect other bruises to show the elephant, to hold up her skin to its blind eyes to say, "See? You speak of this elephant as if it's a lover," the man smiles. Her insides knot, hearing love spoken of with such quiet malice. Love is a strong word, she says, playing with her fork. The moon doesn't exist for the tide, the man tells her. What tides, she wants to say. The elephant masturbator yawns, and the elephant yawns too. We're lucky, the elephant masturbator says, stroking Mwisho. Some survive, and some vanish, and some never exist at all. There's nobody left at the zoo, nobody who knows that she's been here all day masturbating an elephant, the last of his kind. You have nice hands, her mother told her when she was a girl. When she saw the graffiti downtown, laugh of a life-sick elephant in neon letters, she went straight to the zoo thinking this was the nicest thing to do with her hands. There was no advertisement, no applications, no interview. There was no training, no internship, no exams on the history and scholarship surrounding pachyderm arousal methods. But somebody did it before her. For decades, it seems. All the equipment is here. The illustrated notebooks, the vials, the syringes, the lotions, the aprons, the goggles, the electro-ejaculators. But the elephant masturbator uses none of these. Just one skin to another, and Bach. Always Bach. The elephant masturbator bathes Mwisho. His favorite is when she lathers him in mud, but it's getting harder and harder to find water these days. The lakes have dried up, the rivers too. Most nights, the elephant masturbator can hear the neighbors singing hymns in the chapel, like a graveyard of prayers. Have you always been a pixie, the man asks, spooning gray paste into his mouth. She runs fingers through her hair nervously. No, not always, she says. You're very mysterious, the man says later, tracing a finger over her wrinkled navel. I'm nobody, the elephant masturbator says, just a girl from Penguich. The elephant masturbator is tired of all this desert. Sand in your hair, your ears, and under your nails, little grains stuck between your teeth. It's like for centuries people whacked off God until there was nothing left of him, and now everyone is just waiting in his hot, mute dust. This isn't living, the elephant masturbator thinks, but it's not dying either. Lately, when the elephant masturbator hums Bach and Mwisho pretends to hide, his blind eyes are forlorn as if he knows something is being stolen from him. Lately, Mwisho stares into the bucket as if wishing he was no longer blind and can see his reflection. She wonders if blindness is something light or heavy. She wonders if Mwisho is happy or sad to be blind. She wonders if she keeps giving away her happiness, will it boomerang back eventually like a slap in the face? Mwisho sprays her with his trunk. He smiles but does not laugh. She spends an afternoon collecting and boiling rapeseed, skimming off the oil, then grinding the pulp with a mortar and pestle into a rancid lubricant she spreads over Mwisho. He moans. Her hands are chafed and blistered. She can barely hold the pen to write letters to the scientist. Some nights when she can't sleep, she'll sneak into the factory and scavenge paraffin off the humming machines, spitting out yellow plumes that bloat the sky. But looking into Mwisho's glazed eyes, she knows he prefers the rapeseed lube to the machinery grease. They wander the enclosures together, the elephant foraging here and there or playfully swatting her with his trunk. The grass used to be so green, she apologizes. The elephant masturbator knows she can give up whenever she wants. Nothing is keeping her here masturbating this elephant day after day after day. She is not waiting for a thank you. She is not looking for anything to fill the void of her existence now that the curtain is falling on this thing called ecology. She does not believe this will change the course of the universe. She has no babies of her own and wants only to stare into the elephant's wet, blind eyes for reasons she doesn't want to understand. Later, there is just a puff of air and the elephant masturbator sighs. In the man's apartment, the elephant masturbator listens to the man play the piano. The ivory keys are brightly polished. "Do you like Bach?" he asks. "Yes," the elephant masturbator says. Later, as his tongue traces the constellation of moles and scars on her stomach, she wonders if he is thinking about cunnilingus on a butterfly and whether he knows she is thinking about masturbating the elephant. Mwisho is easy, she tells herself. It's Bach, bathe, syringe, and Bach. Men are simple too, but also not so simple. The elephant yawns and the elephant masturbator yawns too. The elephant masturbator stands in the desert at dusk. She wants to be the moon, but she knows she is the water waiting for the tide. The man knocks on the elephant masturbator's door. She doesn't answer. She presses against the door and listens. She waits for him to knock again, waits to decode the vibrations of his desire and her own. The elephant masturbator grinds her foot in the dust. She stomps. Mwisho stomps his feet in the dust. There was a time when the elephant masturbator believed he was calling out to a lover, but she knows that he is the last of his kind. The elephant masturbator knows he's calling out to his mother, the keeper of elephant lore, asking her for the generational wisdom that vanished with the poacher's bullet. The elephant masturbator feels the ground tremble. The tickling crawls down her spine until it feels like a little death. The vibrations are neither bitter nor melancholic, but strangely joyful. Part of her wants to believe he's trying to teach her his language. Beyond the snorts, grunts, roars, and cries, beyond those low, dull rumbles the human ear cannot hear, the grinding, scuffing vibrations of the elephant foot, the foot that doubles as a tongue and an ear. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. I sense we have a animal theme going on here in two very different ways. So now we will move on into the Q&A portion. So if any of you have questions, please raise your hand and Dr. T will run around like a headless chicken finding you. And then for the people that are watching virtually, you can use the little chat and put any questions you may have on there. So, how do you title a story, and how do you know it's a fitting title?
I hate titles. Can I start by saying that? I feel like if I don't know the title immediately, then it takes a long time to sort of figure out what I want to title it. It sort of has to come immediately, and I'll let a piece sit for a long time before I settle on a title, and usually I'll have 4 or 5, unless again it just sort of comes naturally and feels instantaneous. And with this one, I knew it like pretty quickly. So this one wasn't hard, but there are other pieces that are really hard. I don't know. Do you have any tricks, Tim, that you could share?
Deep meditation, prayer to whatever gods give you these things. I always am titling things in ways that are absurd on my computer, and I think like I'll come up with a better title eventually, and sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. And I mean, I'll say the title of my collection was a colleague one day, like, should I say this? Was just talking about, we had 2 copiers in the room, and I said I used the one I trust. And they were like, that's a title. And I was like, you're right. So someone else titled my book. But that was nice.
I feel like it's helpful to have a poet friend.
Oh, yeah,
Poets are
absolutely.
really good with titles. Like I have a really good, trusted poet friend, and I'll run to him for titles all the time.
Writers should do that for each other, though. It's like when you play band name with your friends.
Yeah.
And you're like, they say, you know, and you're like, that's a band name.
Yeah. There should be a job that's just titling. I mean, I would pay good money for that.
Yeah.
If you are really good at titles, let me know. I will pay you good money for titles, because they are hard. They're difficult. Ross, you know? Okay. All right.
Perfect.
I gave you a title today in the park.
That's right.
We might get sued, but you got it. So,
That's true.
Anybody in our audience have a question? Everybody just stare at Nat. She'll come up with a question.
my question gets interrupted by screaming Jamie.
It's all right.
It's a good question.
Understand.
Right.
Yeah, I totally understand.
Hi, so my name is Caleb. I used to work for the press. So my question kind of revolves around that. What made you trust your babies, essentially, to Cornerstone? Thanks.
I went first with the last one.
Okay, fine.
it's your turn.
I'll be honest. I liked, I liked a couple things about the press. For better or worse, at this point in my life, I'm deeply Midwestern, and like something about having those eyes looking at my manuscript, I think like there are like it happened in editing where there were like moments of delight that made me happy, and I think made the readers happy. And it's not that people have to be like you to read your work. That's not it at all. But I think like I like that the press has that in mind, and it wants to promote that. And also I love that it's a teaching press. I mean, I'm deeply invested in my teaching. It's a big part of who I am, and so I love the idea that my book is also helping students at a different university. It's offering them this opportunity. So I liked all of that.
Yeah, that was an appeal for me as well, the teaching press part. And to piggyback off what Tim is saying, the regional outlook I thought was very good. I mean, I remember writing in my cover letter, and I wasn't quite sure whether to put this in a cover letter because you never quite know what to put in those things. You never know what kind of editor person you're dealing with. I mean, now that I know Ross, he's mildly sane. But at the time, you don't know, right? And so I put it, I mean, I did my PhD at the University of Missouri, so I have this Midwest connection. And so I said, the book all takes place in Utah, but I'm Midwestern adjacent. So, that must count for something, But again, it was trying to emphasize the regional aspect, right? Is this notion of the book takes place. And so, I like the fact that the press is invested in that notion of regionalism and trying to capture the strangeness and the weirdness of the regions in this country. And I wanted to, hope that my book adds to like a sort of expanded view of that.
Well, it's all flyover country. I mean, the Midwest, Utah, I mean, we could take up the rest of the evening drawing where the boundaries of the Midwest are.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's all that middle country.
Yeah.
I think it qualifies.
Yes. Utah is Midwest.
Yeah.
The last
fiction event that we had here with 3 authors. Jeff Esterholm is from Wisconsin, so his book takes place in Wisconsin, but Jody Hobbs Hessler's book takes place in Virginia for the most part, and Kevin Clowther's book, of course, takes place in Florida for the most part. So yeah, expanding that idea of sort of regional literature is important to us. So I'm glad that that came through in our materials and then in our interactions with you as we brought your books out.
Well, and I think part of that too, if you go back to the history of American literature, and maybe I'm totally wrong, but that felt like a big thing at the beginning of American literature, this notion of regionalism, and then we lost it for like a big chunk of the 20th century. It became more of this like sort of broad cosmopolitan thing. But I mean, obviously it never was lost because people have always been writing more regional based stuff. And so, I mean, I think that's always been part and parcel of America as a literary experiment in some ways.
More Midwest representation.
Hi there, my name's Quinn. I currently work as one of the members of the press. I have a question for both of you, and it is, early on in your career as writers, how would you describe your experience of like accepting the idea of being an author as like a part of your identity? Like how would you describe your kind of acceptance of that?
Trade off one after the other. Is it
yeah,
my turn?
And perhaps, yeah.
So I started writing, I would say writing seriously when I was an undergrad. I mean, I did writing as a teenager, but it was, thankfully it's all disappeared. I think as a 20-year-old, 20-something, I had these delusions of grandeur as a writer, you know, that I was going to become an author, you know, and I was going to, you know, give Stephen King a run for his money or something like that, you know, just, but I don't know, that was like a brief period of time. That got crushed really quickly as soon as I started bringing things into workshop and, you know, being rightfully so knocked down a peg or two. You know, some of it was savage, some of it was fair. But I don't know. In some ways, I don't know if I think of myself more as a writer. I think of myself honestly more as a teacher and a professor. Like that's the like if I think about like core aspects of my identity, writing is in some ways adjacent to that because I'm so much in the classroom and I love being in the classroom and I love teaching and talking craft. That the kind of the baggage that goes with writer and author, especially as I've gotten older, I've been less interested in that sort of identity marker, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting the way, like, to hear you ask the question. I mean, it makes it sound like a calling, right? Like somehow you're like fighting this thing that you're like, I'm supposed to be a writer. I feel it. And I think like for me, it was almost like the capital A author doesn't, I mean, you know, like that capital W writer doesn't quite exist. I think for me, the moment that I realized, oh goodness, I'm not gonna quit doing this, or like I'm not gonna give it up. It wasn't so much that I became the thing, I was just like, oh goodness, this stopped being a cute hobby. I'm still insisting that I do this, okay. And so, I mean, and I'll echo too, like what Ryan said, I mean, like the things we do in order to keep writing, to pay the bills, et cetera. I mean, often we do labor, we do other things, we teach. Those things are adjacent. They're a different thing than the like fantasy of being, you know, Stephen King or somebody who's got, you know, how many houses does Dan Brown have? I don't know. You know, it's the, like, there's the reality that so many of us are just like, oh, all good sense says I should do something else, but like I'm gonna spend my time tinkering with words and making a mess of my free time. Is that that's a dismal answer, isn't it? I'm sorry.
It's also a very restraining question.
No, it's good.
I mean, I think I also juggled trying to figure out what kind of writer I wanted to be, in the sense of I grew up really close to Los Angeles, and so I grew up with movies. Like that, books were huge in my house, but movies were, so I actually spent most of my teenage years, and thankfully these are all, well, not so thankfully, I made really bad movies with my brother, like just, my dad got us a camera one Christmas, and then that was it. And so I would like write the stuff, and my brother would film it, and we would do all this nonsensical stuff. And so I thought I was going to be a screenwriter for a long time. And then at university, then I thought I was going to be a poet. That didn't happen. So I sort of like bounced around in different ways, trying to find where the kind of writer that I could do well, I guess you could say.
Do you have a next thing in mind? Like, do you have your next project in mind already, or not so much?
I feel like you're asking a couple academics that, which is like always the pressure. You're supposed to talk about the next thing or something. But I mean, yes. So, I mean, I definitely have a project that I'm quasi-actively looking for a place for. Which is again regional, Great Lakes, Midwest. So I'm pretty, I think, invested in that long term. And then I have a couple other things that are more nascent that keep, I don't know, prodding me, keep bringing me back to them, but I'm not sure what they are yet.
I think that's really common, right? You always have something in the back seat that you've been working on and tinkering on here and there. I'm actually, I'm going to be in Poland next spring. I won a Fulbright Award, so I get to go to Poland to research a book that I've been wanting to write for a long time about my great-grandfather fought in World War I, and I have thankfully inherited, there's a long line of liars on the male side, on my father's side, starting with my great-grandfather, who came back from World War I just telling like a whole bunch of lies and about what he did and things like that. And luckily my grandfather and my father collected those oral histories, and so they have him on tape spinning yarns. And my grandfather worked at NASA, but he would, like growing up, he told me that aliens were real and that like we had proof of them, and like just scared the hell out of me as a kid. And my dad's a liar, at least I write mine down, like sort of compartmentalized it. Yes, yeah. Professionalized it, yes, gave some dignity to my family of massive liars. So I want to write actually a book about him, because he said he fought in the Eastern Front in Poland and like all sorts of weird stuff. And it's like, no, you never did, because Americans just never made it to the Eastern Front, like that's just fact. But and like my family history growing up, like I pull a lot of family lore because of the liars in my family. So growing up, I heard all that stuff, and I heard these different stories about stuff that he did. So luckily, I'll be able to go and do some research out there and write the first draft of that book. So that's my next project.
So it's never done on purpose, but the last several readings we've had, a very common theme just like emerged out of the reading. And unless Tim and Ryan, you chatted beforehand about reading the animal stories, I would just like to know, like, what's it like? Why do we write about animals? I mean, American writers have been writing about animals for centuries at this point. We're into our second and a half century of writing about animals. Just wondering about your experience with that and your thoughts about choosing animals as subjects and how they play a role in your fiction.
My turn? I can't remember either. If you got something, go ahead.
I think it's your turn.
Okay, it's my turn. It's so funny you mentioned that. So I was down in Georgia a couple weeks ago at another reading, and I was doing a reading, and I was mentioning this too. I have a Monty Python T-shirt that has the rabid bunny on it. It says "Run Away," and I got that same question from someone in the crowd who was a very militant vegan and made it known. and wanted to know why I was writing about animals and why I had the t-shirt I was wearing. It was very uncomfortable and awkward, as you might expect. And honestly, up until that moment, I don't know how much I really realized that I actually have a lot of animal story stuff in here. I don't know. Like, I'm going to give you a really crappy answer, and that is, I don't know. I didn't plan it, or I don't know if I was really thinking about it in terms of like focusing on animals in the book in some way, but they just sort of pop up. I mean, on the one hand, you can say animals can serve as convenient metaphors for the things that you're exploring, right? That they're these stand-ins for, like, that they give conflict and tension in some way, or, you know, that they help to, they give you stuff to work with to explore the rest of the things that you want to explore. So they're kind of like a crutch that you can use. But that's the best I got. I hope you have better.
Oh, goodness.
And Tim, the staff raved about Knuckles for days. When we would do reports, they would bring up Knuckles.
Yeah.
So you were spot on with that choice.
Okay, good. I mean, I wanted to jokingly say it's because my father was an ag teacher, and like somehow in my upbringing, animals were like around, or it was like an awareness. Like there's another story I have in there that's about a made up, you know, not real that I know of, but like it's a sheep camp where everybody gets their own flock of sheep. And I think it's almost like, you know, and there are lots of people studying in really intelligent ways that I can't currently talk about, but like, you know, the non-human and animal studies, and this is like blowing up. And I think that to me, it's just like, in some ways it's magnetic, it's obvious. It's like we have animals in our lives, don't you all? You know, like, and there's a sort of, like, why wouldn't we write about them? Why wouldn't we be curious about them? It totally works as the metaphoric thing, but as writers, or at least for me, I mean, I have to shut out what I'm actually, like what any of it means, and just be like, no, there are real animals who have like real physical forms and possibly have weird needs that aren't perfectly translatable. And that's really, that mystery is compelling to me, I think.
We'll talk more at dinner about your animals.
We have an online question. What's the best advice you received pertaining to writing, and what advice would you give to students of the Cornerstone Press?
Oh no, that's mine.
That's you.
Oh wow.
You got to think first on that one.
Yeah, best advice. Oh, I mean, the superlative's tripping me up. You sure you don't want to take that one?
I have an answer.
Okay,
Do you want me to
good,
go?
great, please.
I think every writer, no matter how many times you've sat down, how many things you've written, no matter how many books you've written, every time you sit down, you're faced with that blank page, which is daunting. And I think you tend to get into your own head, wondering like, how am I going to do this next time? Like, I got a blank page here. What am I going to write about? What am I going to do? And you start getting in your own head, and you start psyching yourself out, and then you start worrying. You're drafting something, and it's crap, because it's always crap the first time you put words on the page, and so you just need to plow through the crap to get to what you're really writing. To me, the most difficult part is when I get in my own head and I start worrying about what a reader might think of this. Like, oh no, like, am I going to get crucified on social media because I'm talking about masturbating an elephant, you know? I mean, and when you do that, you know, it was actually Lin-Manuel Miranda, no, he didn't talk about masturbating elephants, but he did say, if you get to that moment, and I think every writer kind of faces that at one point or another, if you let those voices in your head say, don't write this, take over, he says you're screwed. He used more colorful language than that, but the notion being you have to plow through and write the thing that you want to write, consequences be damned. Like, and that's hard to do, especially in our current culture, where we nitpick to death everything is, you know, somehow, you know, trying to insult everyone. You have to be sensitive, especially with fiction. You know, fiction to me is not that other art forms don't do this, but it's really this form of empathy where you're coming to someone else's life and you're coming out to someone else's experience. But if you set up these arbitrary taboos and whatnot, you know, yeah, my thing would be write what you want to write, the consequences be damned. And sometimes those consequences, you know, you're rightfully taken to task by the public for writing something really bad. And other times it's unfair, but you have to be true to your vision for whatever thing you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking as you sort of, with your answer, trampled upon some of the things that I was thinking. But I think probably it took me years to realize, it's just to say it was a good answer, because I was thinking about how much play is a part of writing. And it took me a long time to sort of embrace that and to recognize the truth of that. I think as an undergraduate, I came in, as all readers come in, you have ideas of what's good. You have things that like really grilled your cheese or whatever, and you want to write something that approaches that, and that's kind of absurd. And then you think about how other people are going to see what you write, and you're in a bad spot then. And so I think it's really about, you hear people talk about like the parent and the child, and like the child just wants to make a mess, and you have to be that child for as long as you can be, and like make that mess and write about the things that are really compelling you. Because if you write for that parent who's, the parent's leaning over your shoulder being like, what are you doing there? Why are you doing that? And if you're writing for that voice, the writing suffers.
Yeah, I think as you were talking, it made me, that idea of playfulness and experimenting is so integral to the creative process. And I really love, Kurt Vonnegut has his list of 8 rules for writing fiction, and one of them on there is, if you open a window and make love to the world, you will catch pneumonia. And that's your story or your poem or your movie. If you try to please everyone, your piece is dead on arrival. You just can't do it, so don't try. And it's hard. It's hard not to do that. It's hard not to get that in your head, and to embrace that mess and to embrace the playfulness and the experimental stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
I was told throughout every high school English class I've ever taken that writers write what they know, and it really drove me crazy. I hated when they told me that. But how do you write what you know or don't know?
I can go. I'm with you, Ellie. I think that like write what you know, it's like my mentor, Wendy Brenner, would talk about how like don't write what you know. It's like not just that, but like write what you half know and what you half remember, and like write into that. I mean, Bartholomew, like the not knowing, like write into the stuff you don't quite know. I mean, I think too in this moment, Zadie Smith talks about how like write what you know is also come to mean like stay in your lane, and it can feel really constricting to sort of think about like write what you know limits you. And I think you actually know lots of things. Your body knows lots of things. Your experience is much bigger than you realize. And so I've always believed, in fact, I don't know what I know until I write. Like I write in order to figure that out. And so it's kind of absurd to say, write what I know. I don't know it yet. So I just have to do the thing that compels me. And like, maybe I won't make it live, or maybe it won't work, but like, I don't sit down at the page being like, and now I will dump my brain onto the page. It's much more exploratory than that.
And I can't remember who had the quote, but it was basically what you just said. It's something to the effect of, they adjust that quote, write what you know, to write what you don't know that you know. And that, it's a process of discovery. You figure out what the story is, what the poem is, whatever it is as you go. But I'm not going to add much to that. That was a great answer, because that was good.
We have a little time left.
Ava, who was one of Tim's editors.
Perfect.
Okay.
This isn't Donnie.
Hi. I guess my question is, what attracted you both to the short story format?
I love the short story because it feels way more playful and experimental than what a lot of contemporary novels do, which to me is kind of ironic because the novel is supposed to be novel. It's supposed to be, but we're living in an ecosystem of the novel right now that is largely mainstream. I mean, that doesn't mean that there aren't experimental novels. There are, and there's quite a few of them that I like. But short stories have this sort of weird, enigmatic, you're talking about the magnetism of it, right? About writing about animals. The short story feels that way too. Like, there's so much more playfulness, there's so much more things that I feel like you can do with a short story than with a novel, right? The novel. That feels kind of daunting to sit down and do it, but short stories you can do anything. You have this, they can be really compact, like a flash fiction. One of the things I loved about the piece that Tim read was the listing, like all those lists, like the experiment with form. I love that. I absolutely love that when writers do that. And occasionally you'll see a writer do something really great in a novel like that, but it's way less common now. It's way more difficult to even get it published. Not that publishing is the be-all, end-all. I just feel like there's such a plasticity to the short story form that just, I struggled for years thinking that I wanted to be a mainstream writer, and then I sat down and wrote a really terrible novel that will never, ever, ever leave the house. And that just made me realize that I'm much more, I prefer short forms. That's the kind of writer I am. I like to be experimental, I like to do that. And I'm just never going to write that kind of mainstream novel thing. And so, yeah, I just leaned heavily into the short form because it just feels more natural to me.
Yeah, I'll pick up there and say, it's a proclivity. I think I was always inclined. It's also what I enjoyed reading. Like I like novels, but I think I will take any day like a collection of like playful, formally inventive prose over like, I'm not, and some of you all probably feel differently, but like, give me that over like a 6-week novel. I love a good Russian novel, but like the short story that sort of tightrope walk that the writer is doing is really fun to watch, and it can be, all over the place. Novels, of course, can be anything too, but it's, I've heard it said, we write short stories because and I was going to jokingly say, like, I don't like any of my characters that much. I don't want to spend 500 pages with them. But that's not really true, actually. I feel, I think there was a threat that I was going to have to pick my favorite story or something tonight. But I think, it's not that, but it's just, there's some sort of bottled lightning in a good short story, I think.
Okay, good. Follow-up. We'll do Ava then, Quinn, okay?
I'm just good at thinking in twos. What's your favorite story in the collection? This is for both of you. Like in your own collection, what's your favorite story? Yeah. Thank you, Tim.
There it is. There it is. I set myself up. I might as well answer that first.
Yep, that's you.
Did I not just say, you're asking me to pick a favorite child. I don't know about favorite. I think I marvel, I don't know, can I say that? In my collection, there's a story called King Karate, which is written from the voice of a young girl who's like supposed to turn in a science fair paper, and she doesn't know what to do for it. And she turns in a science fair paper that is the short story. And I don't know if it's my favorite. It's the first story I published. It has a special place in my heart. It came quickly. It's probably the one I spent the least time on and never quite felt like I could improve that much. I don't know that makes it my favorite, but it like stands as like a weird anomaly compared to all the others that I want to tinker with. And that one I was just like, well, I don't know. I'm annoyed sometimes maybe, when writers are like, the character just spoke, but that's the closest I think I've been to that.
Yeah, I have a similar response in that it's not my favorite, but there's a story I wrote in here called A North American Field Guide to Glaciers. And what happened there is I had written this story about the Great Salt Lake was totally dried up, but then like this glacier sort of forms, and as you read the story, you realize that it's not like a natural glacier. It's, you know, there's something magical going on with it. But I wrote it, and I was really sort of dissatisfied with it, because I'm like, well, this feels like everything else that I've done in a lot of ways. And then I got the idea that I wanted to integrate photography into it, like old archival photographs from one of the first photographic expeditions up to the Arctic. And so I was going, I don't know, it was during the pandemic, so I don't even know when or where it happened, because we were talking about this, that time during the pandemic, just who knows? It was 50 years ago, it was last week, nobody knows.
No one wants to talk about it either.
Yeah, I know, right? So I was going through these archives, and I just sort of stumbled on all these photographs, and I was looking at them, and I was writing the story at the same time. And then, so I don't necessarily like it as my favorite, but it taught me something about integrating that kind of photography and that word image interplay and telling a story through photographs that in a lot of ways counters the narrative text of the story. So it was really instructive to me as an experiment for making me feel like I'm going to stretch my fiction even more now when I go to write. And that piece, when I wrote it during the pandemic, that was the piece that made me decide to go. I had written a lot of the other ones earlier that come in the collection, but they weren't originally set in Utah. But I wrote that piece, and I said, I had the idea for how to put the collection together. So that was the piece that triggered in my head. So to me, that's like the centerpiece that made everything else fall in place. So I went back to previous pieces that I had published and I had written, and I just messed with the landscape or messed with the characters so that they all fit in the Utah region. And that was the one that gave me the idea to do that. So it was just really instructional for me as a writer. And I think a lot of times when you write, that's the best you can hope for. I think Philip Roth says something like that, like each book teaches you how to write the next book and how to do the next thing. Like it helps move you through, and that's really what that story did, is it's helped me move through for where I want to go next.
All right, hello again. How would you describe your thoughts or your relationship with writing creatively and writing provocatively, if you don't combine those, or if you do, in kind of your thought process?
Is that one for you?
I guess.
I know it's very rough.
So, like, do I separate writing creatively and provocatively?
Yeah, just kind of like, how do you see those two kinds of thoughts in writing?
Are you implying that masturbating elephants is provocative?
Mildly.
Okay, mildly, okay. I never sit down and say, I'm going to write provocatively, right? Like, I never sit down, because I think it's kind of like a comedian laughing at their own joke. It sort of detracts from it, you know? Like, if you're cracking up at your own joke, the only comedian that I allow to do that is Dave Chappelle when he does it. You know, he's already laughing at his jokes before he even gets them out half the time, but I'll allow it. Yeah, I never sit down and be like, today I'm going to be provocative, and type up, you know, provocative fiction or something like that. I'm always more interested in, because I write a lot of absurd things and ridiculous things, I'm always trying to find the human moment or the human drama within that, because then I'll sort of allow the reader to make their own assumptions about what isn't and is provocative. So I'm not thinking about it, even though probably in the back of my head, in revision, I probably start thinking about that a little, you know, how much am I pushing the envelope, or if I, you know, and not every piece needs to do that, you know, not every piece needs to go full throttle in someone's face, so to speak, but this may sound weird, but I try not to think a whole lot when I'm writing. Maybe that's why they come out the way they do. I don't know. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know if you have thoughts on that either.
Yeah, slightly. I mean, in that vein, I sometimes have said that I've admitted that I think when I sit down, it's part of the play of it. Like, I do think often I like to write thinking I'm getting away with something, not necessarily to provoke, but thinking like no one really said I can do this. And I think that does fuel me in some ways, but not necessarily in a scandalous way, and certainly never at the expense of characters, because as you say, I'm always looking for the human thing, and I feel alarm bells going off in my head if I'm simply using a character to be like, and now I will make, I don't know, I'll make you all feel scandalized, or I'll make you feel something other than like, I will send you somewhere other than the emotional terrain that I think you should be experiencing. But I do like the notion that, you know, it's not really like sanctioned what we're doing. I'm back repeating myself possibly with play, but it's like the idea that, you know, when you sit down, you should think, well, this is interesting to me. This is hopefully interesting to you. It's not necessarily what the reader's expecting. I think surprise is a big part of our business. Yeah. And so that does tread occasionally toward that provocative thing. We are interested in being, I mean, so help us. We are in a business where there is no real market demand for my thoughts and my words. And so if I'm not keeping that in mind, if I'm not being interesting, then you all won't be here. You won't read my work.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. It's less about provocative than it is surprise.
Yeah.
And about upending the expectations that a reader has, like where they think this story is going to go or what they think is going to happen with it. So it's surprise, and it's giving them something unfamiliar within the familiar. I think, yeah, it's not necessarily about being provocative, but just subverting your expectations of what you thought this story could be. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have the honors of taking the last question. What authors inspire you as a short story writer, as an academic, as a person?
Whose question is that? Yeah.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Not ending. I mean, when I was thinking about, I mean, so many writers for various reasons. I think when I don't know, I'll answer the question in ways that, like, when I was writing this, or like when I was feeling influenced by, I mean, some short story writers who, I've been fond for a long time of short story writers who are truly short story writers who don't really write novels. Stuart Dybek, George Saunders, some of these people who felt like real, like, devotees of the form. And some of them have novels as well, but I mean, even Laurie Moore, who is, you know, of course, colossal, but is someone who really excels at the short story. So, I mean, I think those people, their voices were, you know, they're hard to get out of your head once you read them. I'm afraid those aren't very esoteric names if you're looking for a reading list. Dan Shawn, another one who really also has written many novels now, but yeah.
I mean, yeah, those are a lot of the same names I would put up for short story writers. In terms of what I'm reading these days, I found myself, and I discovered this over the pandemic too, I have less patience in a weird way for sort of conventional narrative forms for whatever reason. I don't know what it is. I'm always looking for writers that are doing more experimental stuff now. That's a lot of where I see my own writing has been going. And I've looked back at, you know, there's a lot of, like, someone like Italo Calvino is one of my favorite writers. I absolutely love the stuff that he does. Invisible Cities is like a desert island book. I sat down and did that not too long ago. I put together like a list of, like, what are my desert island books? Like, if you're stranded on desert island, what kind of book would you want, you know? And to me, it's something that would continually surprise me over and over again if I'm going to be stuck there for 50 years or something like that. And Calvino's Invisible Cities, recent Nobel laureate Olga Tokarczuk, who's a Polish writer, she has a book called Flights, which is just incredible. It's this sort of encyclopedia, and it bounces around from one place to another, and it's just really weird and has maps in it and all sorts of stuff, and it was a phenomenal read. And I also really like the Austrian writer Thomas Bernhard. I really like his pieces too. So I've been reading a lot more experimental stuff these days.
Thank you for your answers, and thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this lovely evening. And of course, thank you to Michael Martin and Max Cavnez for being behind the scenes, and of course to Dr. Tangadal, where we would not be here if he was not here. So I hope you all have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.